Hey guys, what you're supposed to be doing now is quietly sitting down and read this stuff. That's the That's the feedback from the panels, and I guess I don't know. Some did a proper brief statements, and others have sort of more little essays. I haven't read it myself, so I'm going to read it here on the screen, and then we're supposed to discuss it. So read it, make notes, and then we'll have folks on Zoom. Can you see this? Nobody on Zoom.
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah,
We can see it.
small.
Okay, good. I don't think they need to line up because they're not really reported by panel here. Or do they? I think we can.
They are. They're in the same order. Apologies.
Okay.
They're not super coordinated there.
Oh, yeah, I see that. Mm-hmm. I can't say look up when you're done reading because everybody's looking up reading. Shall we wrap up reading? I have one question for clarification. I don't know if others also didn't understand some things. I'm not quite sure, and maybe that panel could explain what's meant by don't want to undermine the progress with preprints. Does anybody from that panel want to explain? Briefly?
Is that I was like, that sounds like something I would have said.
Okay.
I'm not throwing.
That sounds like something a person might have said in an area that I guess this gets back to we've made so much progress in a lot of communities for seeing preprints as research products in and of themselves. And one worry is that by creating this separate class of peer-reviewed preprints, it will devalue the preprints themselves, which are, and I think there's some interesting kinetics to this of how long a preprint, even a review commons, or something like that is a preprint, how long it's a reviewed preprint, and how, and then how long before it becomes a journal article. And by shifting sort of the gold standard to that middle point, I worry we will devalue what I view as the most important point, which is just getting the research out there in the preprint form as fast as possible for others to build on and conduct their own review.
Okay, so we have a sort of a conflict of two different aims.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So perhaps I see there are also a bunch that agree, and maybe we should try and avoid going over those where we seem to agree or where there's a lot of agreement, and find others where there is conflicting views. And I have not done that myself now.
Sorry, can
But-
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get it.
You could use the microphone. Okay.
I tried.
Good throw, Jamie. A lot of folks on here mention reviewer identity, and I think that we need to have a discussion about why that is important, whether it is important, like what is the point of reviewer identity in a lot of these things. Because I think that if you start using reviewer identity as sort of a rubber stamp of quality, you run into very quickly the same problems that we have now with the journal-based system, but also you are even more sort of sensitive to the effects of bias because the reviewers whose identities are going to be most valued also probably come from the most well-represented backgrounds.
Yeah. I think that's a good one. Our table spent some time talking about that, and maybe Erin, although she's responding to some other email, Erin, do you want to? You made a passionate statement about this at our table about reviewer identity. Is it important? Should we insist on it, or are the dangers too big? And then we can get a discussion started on that for a moment. Reviewer identity.
Yes, I take a very pragmatic view of this, although in the most idealistic view of an academic ecosystem, I think in that ideal view, we'd have, open peer reviews that are signed and where they're not anonymous. But the reality is there are many complications with that. I also think we're not anywhere near that state yet, and I favor an intermediate solution that I think is a more pragmatic one where, reviewers' identity is blinded, known to some, intermediate party, but that reviewers remain anonymous.
Daniela has her hand up, and I'll take more from the floor. Daniela?
Yeah. Well, obviously, plus 1,000 to all of this, agree. But I actually want to add a point, a reference to the first comment that I think was James Fraser, but I couldn't quite tell about the. I haven't thought about that much, but like the possible problem of like distinguishing between a review with preprints and a review without, as like a all that as a plus, and just want to bring out the fact that what may and probably already happens is that the preprints that get reviewed the most are those that are like that have the sexiest science, or that have the authors that have more followers on social media, or that are more recognized. So I think that is also something to keep in mind, and something that we can probably work to try to, as preprint review services, if we do offer like a list of preprints that needs reviews, which is something we're doing pre-review. Also really thinking about bringing to the surface the preprints that may not get that visibility. And this is something we have started to think about years ago, actually, in LifeSprint with Naomi Penfold and others. So I wanted to bring that up.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I think we need to distinguish here between one of Jessica's definitions this morning and general commenting on preprints. I think when we're talking about, I still call it refereed preprints, we agreed on something else this morning, the preprint review, we mean full, selected and commissioned in some way or other review by selected referees. And that's different from posting where you know how many followers you have and how many people you can rustle up to get there. that's a difference, because in this case it's selected. Now, of course, with eLife, they select, and they have to select. It's their first gatekeeping, and they will have to select for interest. And we can also discuss that, and I think it's justified that somebody does that, because otherwise we get swamped. So I think we have to keep that distinction and not muddle it. Am I unfair, Daniela? Is that not?
Well, then you're excluding all reviews on pre-reviews, which you can do because we allow for anyone with an ORCID ID to review. But if that's the case.
Yeah. So now back to yes.
Yeah. If I may just add a point of clarification, the funder working group at least had the selection was not a necessary function. It was really the question of identity and conflict of interest, which a coordinator an editor could identify.
Yes. Yes,
right.
Exactly.
So, but of course, it's all up for debate.
Okay, I think there was a raised hand over there about the anonymity, reviewer identification or anonymity. I can't see. No. Okay, go ahead.
We use and have mandatory open peer review named, and we publish it with the article. I find that the arguments between authors and reviewers is effectively gone. I feel like the paranoia of this person is out to get me is gone. The authors have a better understanding of why that person is asking a specific question because they know the angle they're coming from. And everybody knows exactly what was added to the manuscript based on the reviewer. The other side of the argument, it feels more out of fear. And what is the data on how many people have been attacked because they wrote a bad peer review? What is the data? We know the data on bias. But when you talk more about it, then inherent bias starts to go away. So masking it for the long run isn't a good thing. So I'm a huge proponent of open peer review and named. And I wouldn't trust a review that I didn't know who it was from. I wouldn't be able to use it off of PCI.
But that's okay. That's the verification that we'll get to. I see Richard has his hand up on the screen.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about this anonymity and peer review, and I think it is important to distinguish between verification and identification. I mean, it's somewhat anecdata, but I'll just point out that I feel like I've had this conversation dozens of times with people, and to be brutal, what happens is if I talk to tenured white males, they tend to say they don't see a problem with having open peer reviews in which the reviewers are identified. When I talk to women, people of color, people who are untenured, then all of them worry about the idea of being identified in reviews. And it's not so much the notion that there will be some immediate kind of attack. The real problem is the incentive for them to temper their criticism, because science is a very unusual system in which somebody can wield power over you for decades. So if you're going to peer review something and reveal your identity, you can worry in the back of your mind that you might not get a prize, might not be invited for a seminar years down the line. So it's not so much the notion that there would be some immediate kind of attack. It's the notion that this person could subtly wield power over you and you will never know about it. And you'll be more inclined to temper your criticism. And the real problem is that this will feel disproportionately on the people who are already at the bottom of the power pyramid. So I think we have to be very, very careful about that rather than leaping to it. So I do like the idea of having this as an aspiration for the long term. But I think in the short and midterm, we have to be very, very clear about why this is dangerous and leaping to it for some of the reasons given thoughts that there might be immediate attacks is not really the reason that it's a problem.
Right. Thank you. Is that Mike?
Yeah, I was going to echo the same things. Just to say that I used to really be a hardliner in favor of open peer review, but I've been completely convinced by the large number of people who just feel like they could not participate in a system where they had to publicly identify themselves. And so I think that, one of the things we think that, to the extent that there's still a value in having organizations like eLife and others who are participating in managing peer review, it's that we provide a kind of authenticated anonymity to people, and that, we 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 know who the person is. We trust them, and you trust us. So you kind of trust the person by proxy in most cases. And I feel like that is a really important role to be played in this ecosystem where you have kind of an intermediary who's going to play the roles that we would like to have in trust and verification without forcing people to identify themselves. I just don't think there's any practical way to do anything else for now.
Okay. Yes, please. Can you chuck the mic over?
Oh, sorry. Thank you. So obviously, coming from F1000, where we do have mandatory named peer review as well, I understand the concerns and the arguments, obviously, but I do think that it's all very well verifying the person at the beginning before the peer review, but actually by them not having to put their name on the peer review allows them to actually bring a number of biases and maybe overcritical and all those other elements into that peer review report, which then the rest of the community don't see. And I do wonder if we're kind of, we're tackling the wrong thing, as in it seems to me what we really should be focusing on is addressing the environment and the fact that where people are criticising is not being seen appropriately by the community. We should be getting ourselves to a point where the culture recognise and support open discussion and debate, rather than allowing this sort of, even if it's further down the line, the negative impact of being critical.
So at our table, we discussed and agreed there was an ideal endpoint, which I would say, though we didn't explicitly say, it probably can't be reached because we're human and we have fears and we are not all as nice as we would wish to be. And so I think we have to sort of look to what extent that ideal is reachable. And now I forgot what I was going to say, but it doesn't matter. I'm sure there are other people who want to say stuff and it'll come back. Yeah. Oh, somebody on the screen? Are those hands still up? Mike, is your hand still up or is that up again? I know you can always find something to say, so... Okay,
it's just up again. I'm gonna lower it.
Okay. No, we got whatever you...
Yeah.
Okay, I think this is a great discussion. So I appreciate everybody's comments on it. And to me, I have 2 points, really. The first one, in response to what I've heard, is that there are both great things about anonymity and great things about being open. And I just wonder if we take like a systems perspective to this, whether or not one solution is to create the bottleneck at the front end where we have anonymity. But what if we can try to have both ways, where we create a system of accountability at the back end where we don't have to have a bottleneck at the beginning or at the front end for input wise. So we could create systems on top of the one that we have where we can have openness, but also try to protect the people who might have repercussions based on not being anonymous in their reviews. So that's the first point, if that makes sense. And then the second point is one thing that we discussed is potentially if we could have this preprint peer review or preprint review as a body of work that is can be evaluated in a way that's equivalent or seen as just as important as our scientific output. So our review output also having value in, like, say, tenure and promotion reviews. And how can that work if it's all anonymous? Because one way that we could do it is, like with rapid reviews, there's a DOI, it's published, your review, and you can actually cite that on your CV or in other bodies of work. So potentially you could have 2 bodies of work that are up for evaluation where you have your review documents or publications and then your scientific output. But I don't know if I see that working if everything is all anonymous.
So both. I remember what I was going to say about the first one, about the anonymity. I mean, you can think about conferences or group seminars or institute seminars where people are quite open and aggressive. The thing is, you're up there giving your talk and the feedback from the floor is only that, feedback from the floor, and you can take it as aggressive as you like. When it's a paper, of course, this is in the old culture. where it was your paper getting into that top-level journal or not, and some nincompoop dares to criticize your beautiful science and prevents you from getting it in. And that's where I think tempers will then begin to split, and where there will be bad feelings. So we have to keep that in mind. So then your question was the output. Yes, that was discussed extensively. How can we give credit to that aspect? And at least at our table, there was a difference between do institutions do it, in recruitment and promotion, and do grant agencies that grant grants specifically do it? And if so, at what level? So any input from that? Yeah.
Just
Jessica.
one quick request, if you could say your name as you're speaking for the Zoom audience and online audience.
I'll remind them. Yeah. But right now we see Prachi's name, and she's got her hand up.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Maria. So I guess I wanted to say that, I think the concern from the people who prefer the open peer review is that, that there can be some sort of hiding behind the anonymity and sort of bad behavior that gets perpetuated because of that. And I guess the point I wanted to make is that I actually, I'm a little bit less concerned about that in this system where the peer reviews are open, because there's sort of recourse by the authors that if someone actually behaves badly, even in an anonymous way, there is a recourse to actually respond in a public way. Instead of that, in a secret peer review, if there's anonymity and there's bad behavior, paper gets rejected, there's not, and people skulk off to the next journal. There's nothing that can happen there. Mm-hmm. But in the system where it's actually open, that mitigates some of that concern.
Right. Very good. Okay. I think Stefan, and then who was that? That's Claire. Yeah.
It's a biased data point, but we permit anonymous review, but less than 5% of our reviewers ask to be anonymous. Now, the reason it's a biased data point is that I don't know how many people choose not to review for us because we say that our default is open named peer review. But I think it's probably of greater concern to us than it is to most people out there in terms of the discussion we're having here. Maybe one of the reasons for that, though, is if you source very broadly. So I think to the extent that associate editors tend to source from within their network, then the likelihood that the same person is going to be sitting on your study section or you're going to be reviewing their next paper is greater. If you're sourcing from Brazil and China and South Africa and Germany and France and whatever, for everybody, the likelihood of that 2 degrees of separation where somebody's likely to be sitting on your study section is significantly lower, and therefore the fear factor, I think, is reduced. So to the extent that we help to fix the diversity problem, I think we also help to fix the fear because of the sort of incestuous nature of our work.
Yeah. For some, of course, for inviting to conferences or reviewing your paper in return, that's still there. But even so, the larger the network, the less frequent that would happen. Let's got Katrina,
Yeah. I think the discussion around open peer review and the anonymity or exposing the identity of reviewers is actually holding up transparent peer review in general. I think it would be easy, and especially with preprints, if we're talking about peer-reviewed preprints, if you also mandate that any journal article or a preprint, essentially any article that is submitted for hiring or tenure, comes with its reviewer reports, and you actually without the names. And so you force transparency onto the journals as well to provide context for those articles. And then what you can do is essentially have an equal game. You've got a preprint and a review and an article and a review. They're more equivalent rather than, again, take the focus off the brand name, put it onto the review that goes alongside the
Great
the
constructive
actual article.
suggestion. Daniela, and then maybe somebody can find another topic. I think we've talked around this one for a bit. Daniela, last word on anonymity?
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to see more like standardization around like possible ideas, and we're gonna try it out and see how it works at Preview. But like the idea of having pseudonyms and then the secure ways for a requester that could be a funder or a journal to unmask that name with obviously consent from the reviewer. And that can serve as if the journal really requires that, like you can unmask the conflict of interest, which actually conflict of interest could be stated in a pretty possibly vague way if you're a pseudonym, but all of the reviewers have like identifiable. So there was a comment by Richard, I think, in the chat. It was like distinguishing this identity and ability to verify. I don't remember what was exactly the name, but I think that there are ways that could be done. It could be explored, and would allow more people to contribute, and also choose to wanting to be recognized when they want and by who they trust.
Okay, Denis, you want a point and a further point on this one?
This is a good point by Daniela. Just to tell you that this is what we are doing at PCI. I mean, people can remain anonymous, reviewers can remain anonymous, but if a journal or somebody, a journal is asking the name of the reviewer, with the agreement of the reviewer, we pass the name to the journal, to the managing board, but it's confidential. So this is completely possible.
Yeah, so that's part of what Michael was saying, that there's a protected space in which names will be shared, but obviously not be shared with the author of the paper.
Exactly.
So they remain anonymous to the author of the paper. Shall we cover other points? We have another 17 minutes. Reviewer exhaustion came up. But that may not be the most interesting. But does anybody see anything that they want to particularly? And I don't know if we can find a solution for that. Paying reviewers,
or if there's anything that did not make it onto this slide.
Yeah.
Any groups that you'd like to raise?
Anybody have a particular gripe? What about paying reviewers? So we had I'm just picking from our discussions now. We had a really interesting one about paying, and there's two payings. One, they both are to do with reviewer fatigue. And one is stop, and one is, again, Erin's particular pet hate, and that's having journals, and all our pet hate, papers passed around journals forever, one after another, which leads to multiple reviewing. What about reviewing fees, submission fees? That's one. And the other is, what about paying reviewers? I think our table came down on submission fees, fine, why the heck not? Paying reviewers, not really, will lead to new ways of gaming. It's part of our academic duty anyway to serve the publication ecosphere. I'm not saying the publishers. Any views on that? Yeah, please. You've got a mic next to you. No, to you.
I'm sorry.
Remember to...
Hi, I'm Ankita. I'm from NIH. We were also discussing about the payment thing. I think some of us feel like, of course, if you get money for reviewing, it's great, but does not really bring a cultural shift, which we were discussing. And I don't know how to bring that into picture, which we are talking about here.
It would not bring it might bring a cultural shift in the wrong direction. Got him? And then Iraj.
I'll go to this one. Hi, Gautam from EMBL. Maybe to relate that to something that we got stuck on in our group with no idea of any solution really is that, so even if you leave it as community service, which is fine, you still need to shift the bulk of people's reviewer. People still need to want to shift the bulk of their reviewer burden to reviewing preprints. At the moment, it's non-existent, right? I mean, we all review papers and we do it constantly. So, but it's not clear to me. There's just zero incentive structure at the moment to drive even motivated people towards reviewing preprints unsolicited, right? So, so I don't know if people have thoughts or other groups had more constructive discussion of the issue or not. But.
Yes, please. Can you?
All right, Elliot from PeerRef. I think the majority of peer reviews for preprints come from when they're solicited. So if they go through review commons, through PeerRef, through PCI. So, and that's also we've seen in earlier conversations where people want them to come from, right? That's when they'll be more trusted than if someone just writes a review themselves. So I don't think the problem is people not doing the peer review, because if someone asks us to organize peer review, we can find a reviewer. It's that there aren't enough people asking for peer review on their preprint. So we need to, set up an incentive structure to get people posting preprints and then asking for peer review on them. And then that will come naturally. There'll be more peer-reviewed preprints.
Okay. Iraja? And then Thomas.
Yes, Irache from HHMI. In our group, we didn't necessarily discuss the payment for reviews. We took a broader approach to incentives, but I think there was something that we discussed that it may be relevant to this payment thing, because at the end of the day, it's like, what do you pay for? You have to start having a standard as to when do you qualify to be paid for this, which is something that has happened in journal peer review as well. And I think it ties also to the reviewer's exhaustion element. And what we discussed was that it is great, of course, to have more preprint reviews, but if you're having, such committees having to read the preprints and then the reviews and essentially assess both, and then have the preprint next door with other reviews in a different format, you are really starting to add a lot of burden to that assessment. And that what may really facilitate the process is to have, I think the way we refer to it was signals from those reviews that would allow you to make those comparisons between papers and say, what is this assessment telling you about the paper in terms of how rigorous it is, its value to the field, etc. Allows you to compare it to the preprint next door with another type of review, but at least having some consistency or structure by which you have those signals and you can compare across. Because otherwise, again, without something like that, how do you choose when you pay a preprint reviewer?
Yep. Thomas was next.
Well, it is sort of a related. It's not directly related to payment, but to sort of the bottleneck in peer review. We have the experience that we have to exert a lot of convincing to recruit enough reviewers on every paper that we send out. We send out 80%, and sometimes we have to ask more than 40 people to secure maybe 2 or 3 reviewers. One of which will probably write a one-liner, and 2 others do an okay job. And so I just wanted to raise a bit the issue of sort of the cost benefit of incentives that incentivize researchers to review papers, and also what we heard this morning, that it's exciting to peer review a preprint that show really exciting science. It's kind of a very nice experience. But I wanted to raise the issue that there is also a lot of science that is good science, solid science, but not that exciting. And sort of what is the magnitude of the incentives that we should provide to convince, a lot of scientists spending 6 hours to review in depth a piece of work that is good. So it's not a question of the science is not of good quality. It probably deserves peer review, but it's not super exciting, and it is really a service, selfless service to the community. And whether we should think, maybe all the preprint do not need in-depth peer review. Maybe we can have different kinds of peer review, some of which are leads to a big reward to the reviewers, and others are sort of more modest. But we should keep in mind that the effort of peer review that we request from the community is enormous, and it's not always mega exciting.
Good point. Go ahead, please.
I feel like I'm going to be harping on this point a lot during this meeting, so forgive me here. But I hearing all of this discussion, I keep thinking that funders are the answer here, and I think it's very frustrating to me, the idea that we have to pay people for these reviews when reviewing papers is a part of our job as scientists. We get paid by universities, we get paid by funding agencies, and both of those institutions care immensely that the science that makes it out into the world gets reviewed. I think when you are reviewing for a for-profit journal, you should absolutely be paid because they're making money off of your review. But I think for any of these kinds of incentivized open reviews that we are trying to talk about, it should be incentivized through universities as part of evaluation for promotion and tenure. It should be incentivized through funding agencies as part of your ability to actually win grants. I think that is our payment.
Yes. Prati.
Yeah, so I just wanted to comment on Tomas's point of that everything doesn't necessarily need to be peer reviewed, which I completely agree with that point. And but not just because some science is not interesting, but I think it's worth remembering that, that the peer review that we're talking about is this single point in time peer review at the beginning of a lifetime of a piece of work. And that's, we're trying to look in the crystal ball about the impact that work will have, and not just talking about, whether it down the line actually stands the test of time, gets, replicated, gets tested orthogonally, gets built upon. Those are the things that we're actually going to tell us about the sort of rigor and quality and impact of the work over time, right? So that, I think there's another dimension that not just the level of interest in reviewing those things, like what are the things that will actually determine that rigor and quality, and recognizing what we're doing with peer review for what it actually is.
Good point. I think we've heard an interesting beginning of a discussion now about stratification, and Thomas brought out the stratification of interest, importance, impact, whatever you want to call it, in the published outputs. There's another one, and that's what we see here. If I look around this room, we're all working at top world institution, funded by top funders, working at super journals, working in huge engaged manner in community projects. And we heard only 10% of papers actually are out there as preprint. Are we actually, what about the entire rest who don't even know about the things we're talking about here? Never mind care about them. So how do we deal with that? We're a bunch of idealists here, not all of the same opinion, but that's fine. But there's a huge community out there that doesn't care about our discussion at all, if they're even aware of it. So, but we do want to convert them all. Yeah.
I personally feel like, and we were discussing it during lunch or something, that, especially being a postdoc right now, I feel like there is a movement going on, and I completely agree it's not across, but we have to start at that level of PhD. Like, it has to be a part of the training. And that's like every discussion I have with anybody about this, it kind of feels like, even in a closed system, the way we are learning how to review a paper is really from your mentor, there's no judgment out there from anybody or any feedback from there that whether that's the right way to do it or not, right? So it really needs to be somehow, maybe centralized might not be the right word, but like some sort of a centralized way to change that at that level early on. Otherwise,
okay, well, that's reassuring. If we can, just like with climate change, if we can rely on the younger generation for publication change, that would be reassuring. Not that climate change activism has got us very far, but at least it's there. Sophia, you want to say something?
Yes, please. Yeah, Maria, thank you for that comment about the sort of the wider world. This is Sophia Camoun, Sainsbury Lab in the UK. I've been exposed to that recently because we started a foundation called Get Genome, and the idea is really addressing inequality in access to genomics and working primarily in Africa and Latin America for the moment. And through our discussions, we realized that if you go to these communities, they don't know anything about preprinting, let alone bioarchive, but even things like the fact that you could get DOI and citation for your poster, for example. And they get very excited once we tell them about it. And it's very, very exciting for them. In fact, perhaps more so than for our community here, as that because the traditional publishing is so expensive right now. It's just out of reach for them. So APCs are ridiculous now. Countries like I was in South Africa, we worked with Mexico recently, and even countries like that, which are relatively wealthy, they just can't afford publishing now in many of the journals. So I think the answer to your question is yes, we need a lot more education and training about these topics. I worked with CIMMYT. CIMMYT is, those of you who don't know, is maize and wheat center in Mexico. They're basically responsible for 20% of the world calories. They're basically WHO for wheat, if you like. And they don't know about anything. They don't know about preprinting. They don't know about the fact that they can post their data sets in Zenodo as mini papers and still get credit for it. So training, education.
Yeah, very good. Please again. You didn't introduce yourself earlier, so
yes.
Yeah? No, you did, Sophia. Yeah.
Hi, Tara Fisher, postdoc at the NIH. I'd say definitely agree with more training, but I would say maybe we could take some lessons from grassroots organizing because we, the idealists, need to organize together so we can have collective power. And this ties back to the funders, because the funders aren't going to change by individuals going up to them and asking them to change. But if we as a community can organize and come together to try to change the system from the ground up, then we could potentially push for top-down change that could get the rest of the people involved too.
Good point. Yeah, bottom again?
I have something from Slido, but it's on a different topic.
Oh, Slido, yes, please go.
Yeah.
No, maybe just a quick note on this elite institution, elite crowd thing. I mean, that's true, but it's also not particularly honest to try to push the burden onto anybody else straight away, right? So if we can't, we can't transform ourselves, right? We can't do it in a kind of if we can't reform the ecosystem, being the people that are on the search committees and on the funding committees and running the journals, it is not very intellectually honest for us to tell people in Brazil or India to
get them on board is what I meant.
But I think the only way is to lead by example. Yeah. I don't think anybody wants to be instructed, right? So just to say that we have to do it all, but obviously we have to start somewhere.
Slido and then Jamie.
Yeah, thank you. It's a comment from Gary Ward. For preprint review to be useful in hiring, promotion, funding decisions, it seems critical that we use either structured reviews or a standardized vocabulary. Reviewing CVs will otherwise be a nightmare. So I think touches on this point of standardization versus free-form comments.
Yeah, someone else mentioned that, comparable to make things. Okay, we'll have you first and then Jamie.
It's just a really small comment on it. That as someone who tried to create a standardized review, reviewers don't really like it. It didn't last very long because our hypothesis originally was, it could make it easier for reviewers if you have a standardized format, and the review of those reviews is just that we don't want to do it. It doesn't fit the way I review. It doesn't work. It's not allowing me to review it thoroughly. So, we kind of had to stop being very structured.
Again, idealism versus realism. Jamie's next.
I loved your point, Maria, where, we're all influential people within our own communities, whatever level that is, whether it's like a multinational funding organization or, our own labs. And I also love the points from the postdocs about, these grassroots actions. And I think we're going to be setting ourselves up for failure if we identify one magical solution out of this. We need to be doing many things in parallel. We need to be attacking it at the points where we have the most influence individually within our communities. That means you, Maria, get to attack it at this European level. I get to attack it at UCSF or within my own lab. The postdocs, you get to attack it within your journal club or within your future labs or your future careers. So, one of the hard things about these discussions is that, we try to arrange them, learning from Ron about very tangible outcomes. And I think it's all of our responsibility, all of us who are attending this meeting, to find our own tangible outcomes that we can do individually and just start doing them.
Yep. As many of us are. Please, shall we have a last?
Just a small comment on structured review. One of the many things that I really loved about eLife's recent announcement is this idea of a brief summary up top with some keywords on, the importance of the article and the strength of support. And I have found this really useful in doing preprint reviews with my peers. So there are ways to do structure that are not nearly as much of an imposition as other ways.
Thank you. Anybody from the Zoom group out there want to make any further comments? We've come up to our coffee break, but I feel maybe, what was that salvo showing up just now? No? Any further burning comments from here? Okay. Yeah.
Ready to throw.
Okay. Then we're going to have to pour more coffee down our throats now. Yeah, okay, one over there.
I think going back to incentives, I think we need to be really careful about this because what may be a token appreciation to you and I might be very different to a graduate student making 24K and maybe not a first world country. And so if we add incentives, I think we need to be careful that these don't become perverse incentives for people that might not have the same advantages as we do. If done wrong, I could see someone being exploited to basically fund their studies, with these kinds of incentives. So we need to be really, really careful and imagine how this could affect people from a different perspective than our own. Thank you.
Totally. Okay. So, Gautam, you have another point?
No, just to say that we come back at 4:10.
Okay.
And then...
Okay.
We
Right.
expect to see fun beverages from the Zoom people when we come back.
Okay, guys. See you at 10 past. Okay, see you at 10 past. Are we?
It's an addiction. I just wanted to comment. I really appreciate the strength of the advocacy for science. I think there's a bit of a